Hello and welcome to Down to Art. I'm your host, Kristy Gordon, and today I'm chatting with Lily Koto Olive about art writing. So, welcome, Lily. It's so good to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Kristy.
So, Lily is an Australian born artist and writer currently based in North Carolina. Lily's artworks have been exhibited nationally and internationally, and her art writing has been published in the Brooklyn Rail, Vegan, and Art Rated. So, Lily, I was wondering when you're sort of in the process of about to write about some work, what is the process like for you as you start to analyze it and start preparing to write a piece about it?
Sure. So if I am doing a review that involves going to see an exhibition in person, the process would be, I would go to the exhibition, I would pick up the catalog or any kind of press release, and then I would spend some time with the works themselves. And I love to, take photos of all the exhibition label texts and read any kind of, historical background or any kind of press release or information biographies in relation to whatever artists are involved with the shows, the works in particular. And then I would just sit with the works and think about them, maybe make some notes. If it were to do with reviewing an online show or a show that I'm not seeing in person or an art book, similarly, I would probably, read the text and look at the images and then start it, as I would start like any piece of writing, just kind of coming up with a summary of the main points. And then trying to create an outline or structure for myself and thinking about how I react to the images and where I see, any kind of analogies to, maybe like a past art historical movement or any artists that seem to be related and where they sit, in terms of like aesthetic and dialoguing with the larger art world and art history in general.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it sounds like quite a process and good that you have a lot of like knowledge about art history as well. And then like when you're actually writing the piece, is there a certain kind of structure that you generally use about like how you analyze the piece? Like what does it look like? What's the medium? What I don't know, like when you're writing about it, is there kind of like a slight structure to how you sort of analyze it in words?
Um, I don't know that I have a set structure. Um, as of yet, I just start with noting, maybe like colors or concepts, and then try to think about what kind of conceptual meaning the piece may have. And, some pieces are not as heavy on that, maybe more so, or, kind of positioning themselves, maybe just, um, maybe it's just about like light or color and form. So really just trying to kind of take a step back and think about, what my perception of the intent of the piece is and taking some notes and then, kind of going into a deeper dive. So in terms of like an initial structure, I think I would just, think about like like what kind of movement could I associate this piece with? Does this remind me of any other particular artist? What's the primary mood or feeling? Are there any certain colors or juxtapositions or imagery, that may be familiar and why, or if not, then why? And, what makes the piece unique and interesting?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So you're kind of looking at like the visual impact that it has and the kind of underlying like mood or kind of theme that it's like working with and the greater art historical like context that it fits into. Um, and then I think I heard some other art writer talking about like writing about art and how the first sentence is like the hardest to write, and once they've come up with the first sentence like the rest of the piece flows, or sometimes the first sentence will be like the last thing they figure out. What's your relationship with the first sentence? How do you figure out how to start it so that it's like somewhat interesting? Or
I can see that could be a struggle. Um, I think when I'm thinking about the first sentence or for first few sentences, I kind of tend to think more, if it's a current exhibition, usually I put that information up the front.
mm,
So for me, I might put less weight on the first few sentences and more just kind of hey, this is what this is, and this is how long it's going to be showing, and this is who's involved. So more of like the who, what, when, where, why type information, just so
Oh
whoever's
yeah.
reading it, if they were interested in, like looking at the book or looking at the online exhibition or going somewhere in person, that they would all have all that information kind of right up front.
Oh, that makes
Um,
sense.
yeah.
Yeah, that's like good newspaper writing, or yeah, that's a good structure. Well, that kind of eases things up a little bit. Yeah. So how did you get started with art writing?
Well, I think I've always enjoyed writing. My family's my dad's a creative writer and he writes poetry. And so I think um, just having, grown up in a family that seems to enjoy writing makes it more, I wouldn't say like come naturally. I wouldn't say that it's always easy or anything, but I think it kind of created some level of importance in my life just because I was around that. So in terms of coming to art writing, I actually spent more time initially writing about music. So when I was in undergrad, getting my bachelor's in art and design, I was DJing at a radio station, and from there I went to writing about bands and concerts and doing interviews and in person reviews, and got published in some magazines and blogs. And then when I moved to New York, I worked in as a publicist, and I worked as a creative director for some art spaces and some galleries. And so I just started to write about art as well as music, more just kind of like culture in general. And then in terms of artist interviews, when I was in graduate school with you, Kristy, the New York Academy of Art, I started an art website called Art Rated, and that just was involved. One of my colleagues at the time, Jonathan Beer, and we teamed up, and we just felt that it would have been really kind of a neat thing to capture our classmates in their studios. So we just went from studio to studio and interviewed people, and then from there it just grew into like a larger interest. From starting to kind of meet some larger artists and do stuff, in person, as well as getting contacted by galleries and being asked to write, and review their shows.
Oh, that's interesting. So galleries like started contacting you and stuff. I love the DIY approach that you and John like started it, and then it just started to like take off. Um, that's interesting. So galleries were like reaching out to you, and which galleries were reaching out to you?
Oh my gosh, it was probably like 10 years ago, so I can't, trying to think of who.
Oh yeah, it's probably changed like who's around
We
these
went to
days.
Mana Contemporary and interviewed some artists there. We went to some art fairs. I mean,
Huh.
it's quite a lot of galleries. And so it's just, once they start seeing that you're interviewing their artists, if someone's being represented, then you're gonna have to liaise with the gallery often anyway, just to, get
Totally.
images, or kind of, you might have a little bit of back and forth depending. We also just organize stuff ourselves with our artist friends. Being artists in New York, just kind of, I felt like it was something that I could just kind of reach out to an artist I like and be like, hey, I like your work, and we have this website and we really enjoy visiting and meeting new artists and building a community, and we'd love to, check out your studio. Can we come? Or if it was this particular exhibition artist we both really liked, we'd be like, hey, how do you feel about us, writing a review? And I don't think we've ever had anyone say no
No, of course
during
not.
that time. So it's just, it was a really great way to kind of build a nice like artistic community and meet new people and new artist friends, and spend time in people's studios, and learn about other people's processes.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I mean, it is such a great way to basically get to meet like any artists that you like, that you want to know, and a good way to like connect with galleries too. Um, are those the main, I mean, and it's really fun to write about art and sort of think critically about art. Like, would you say those are like the main kind of benefits to like being an art writer? Not that there has to be benefits, but those seem like really great things.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's also like if you're a fine artist yourself. I mean, you could take someone like Jerry Saltz, like he actually started as an artist before he got into art writing, which I find interesting. So, but even if if you follow him on social media, you'll hear him kind of, joking around about just like joking, not joking, just about how difficult it is to make a living as an artist. And I think, he's like, come on, guys, you really should care about this because there's really not that many, remaining art critics left. But he's, the real deal and on TV, and not that I'm not, but he's I when you reach a certain level like that, then I think you can kind of like have even more access to artists into
For
different ways.
sure.
But from my point of view and where I'm at with it, yeah, I think meeting people, expanding my network, and then being able to focus on writing, getting I feel like each time the process is a little different, a little more unique, and then you learn something about your own approach to writing. So that's satisfying in and of itself. And then of course it's always
Mhm.
really neat to get published. It's like, it feels good.
Yeah.
And it feels great to be able to promote other artists and like help other people out. And it's interesting to do it and then think about that process and with your own work as well. It helps you kind of, I would say, like for example, like I know that you teach, Kristy, and I've taught art as well. We both, have been, worked as artists as well as being on the other side and teaching other people how to create and paint. And it's just a different way of thinking, and I think it helps kind of shape a broader perspective at looking at art.
I was totally thinking that too. Like, I almost feel like teaching is like the next level, like an extension. Like, once you finished all your schooling, but I want to keep learning always as an artist, then teaching is almost like the best way to kind of keep learning, actually. Like, and I feel like art writing is like that too. Like, it keeps your brain sharp and like keeps you thinking critically about art and sort of researching what's going on in the art world. And it's like I think it's a really cool way to keep like really engaged in what's going on. And also I like what you said about Jerry Saltz. Like, I think maybe I don't know, a lot of art writers that are really good at it, maybe they started out as artists. I feel like artists, I don't know, we have like a unique way of being able to look at art that's like really involved with the art. It's not just like, I don't know, intellectual or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, if you live it, then you kind of like anything, if you're teaching it and you're doing something that you instruct as well, then it's really like kind of your world and you're so immersed that I feel like it makes it
Yeah,
easier to explain it to other people. I mean, and likewise, I think
totally.
that, the more you talk to other artists, the more you really like focus in on their work and engage and kind of go deep with it, then I think the benefit is just, being able to kind of expand your perspective and learn more about the nuances and different techniques people have. And maybe you choose to bring them into your own studio, maybe you don't. But either
Totally.
way, I feel like it's a great way to kind of build community and stay engaged. And I love being able to help other people get their works out and seen by more people.
Totally. Yeah. Um, and then like how do you like pick the artist like when when you're going to be writing about them? How does that happen?
I'll say like when I was in the music industry, when I was doing that professionally, like writing professionally or doing press releases and, writing biographies for people, sometimes, often I loved the music. Sometimes if you're doing something, for an income, you're being put in a position where you're having to craft material, like creative material about something that you may not be that 100% authentically,
Right.
drawn to, or it might just not be your style. And so I felt that when I started writing about art, because it's like a side passion and some, I really wanted to be able to pick work that I felt excited by. Maybe not necessarily work that is anything to do with what I do, but if I'm, picking who I want to write about, it's like, wow, I think that person's doing something really unique, or, I love, the way that they're such a like painter's painter and, their luscious brush strokes, or maybe I'm interested in, video artist or installation that I find inspiring, and really just think about, who would I love to learn more about? Like, who would I just love to talk to? Like it, who would you just love to kind of sit down and have an excuse to chat and, get to know somebody more. And
Totally.
like you don't always have to say, obviously you don't have to say yes to like any, anyone's, the galleries will pitch you. And of course, like you'll get tons of, stuff into your email asking you to write about people, and you'll have your friends ask you to write about them. And there's only so many hours in the day. So I think it's just kind of prioritizing what you think is you're most excited about.
Yeah, for sure. That's interesting. So you would get a lot of galleries pitching to you. What did like their email typically look like? How do they pitch?
Well, I mean, it just depends if it's a smaller gallery or a larger one. But I mean, I guess the standard thing is you'll get on their press list, like you'll get on their email list, and then you'll get press releases. Sometimes they're enclosed, sometimes they're an attachment. Usually, it's some kind of mail list email. So sometimes it's just you're on their list, like for like David's Warner or something. They may or may not contact you directly. If you get in there with the larger galleries, then yeah, you can start working with them directly. But otherwise, maybe you'll start getting on their list because they're aware of you as a writer, and so you'll be maybe invited to like a press preview where you can go in and see an art show before it opens to the public, and have a chance to meet the artists, or go into the gallery and see the works ahead of time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is really nice. Or like you'll
That
get
sounds
invites to
fun.
art fairs, and it's definitely perks. I wouldn't say it's always
Oh, that's
I mean it's
interesting.
yeah. Or like when you develop relationships with galleries, and you've written about their artists before, they might be like, hey, we have the show, you might be interested, here's the press release, and these are the dates, and please let us know if you want to set something up. So the more you work with like certain galleries, the more they probably would get to know you too.
Ooh,
um,
that's
you build
fun.
a
I kind of
relationship.
like the
Yeah.
idea of galleries reaching out to you instead of us always reaching out to them. It's a nice
Yeah, well, you're kind of,
twist.
doing them a favor, not a favor,
Totally,
but
totally.
it's of course like most galleries are gonna want, someone that's helping to get the word out about their artists. And, obviously if you're doing it yourself, it takes a little bit of time to build up, a readership, or, have enough people coming to your site. But, even like a small blog, like anything, like a small gallery or whatever, like people come by, and you never really know who might be following your reading, or catching your article that day. And
Hmm,
yeah, you're kind of might
totally.
be have some followers that the gallery wouldn't have access to, personal friends or connections in other parts of the world, that you might be helping the artist connect to get a show, or maybe a new collector, or just getting more people in to see their current exhibition that you're writing about. So
Yeah. And then I guess like I imagine sometimes you're kind of given maybe assignments. I don't know if the Brooklyn Rail or any of them would give you like, and that would maybe be tied with a show or something, right? Like when an artist is already having a show, um and then would you get like an assignment ever from like a certain publication?
yeah, I mean, I have been given assignments, and I've also, had publications say, hey, if there's something you're interested in writing about, let us know.
Oh.
And they'll give you options. I did several reviews for the Brooklyn Rail, and so I was reviewing some of their art publications, art books.
Oh.
Um, I really love Alice Neal, so I got to review an art publication about some of her work, and that was really neat because you get a really nice, cool, shiny, beautiful new book in the mail about one of your favorite artists, and then you get to sit down and
Ooh.
immerse yourself in it, and look at the images. And um that gets a bit meta as an experience because you're writing about writing. So that's I mean
Ah.
that's a whole other ballpark than like doing an artist interview or an exhibition review.
Yeah.
um but they have a great, most newspapers, they have a whole editorial team. And it'll definitely make you a better writer, but it's the first few times you do it, it's quite difficult, just because you're going back and forth with an editor. But a good editor will help you learn to tell your story in a more common language that makes sense for their publication. So you kind of
Mhm.
learn how to craft your writing into what makes sense for them. Um,
That's really useful. Like with artist statement writing, everyone always complains about artist statements that are like too just don't make any sense, like too like philosophical or something. It seems like good practice to be grounding art writing and just making it like accessible and easy to read. And um, that kind of thing. But also I wanted to ask, so, and then if an artist was like sort of reaching out to you directly, what suggestions would you have for any artists that want to sort of try and maybe get their work before some art writers? Did that ever happen? Did artists ever like reach out to you
Oh
directly?
yeah.
What would be
Yeah.
an effective way of doing that?
Um,
I mean, of course, it all depends. It still all depends, but like, what would be a good way that would be considered at least, or whatever?
I mean, I think it's like when you approach a gallery, if someone wants you to write about their work, it kind of needs to make, you would hope that they would have looked at your website or your publication.
Yeah,
I don't know whether it's in print or in online. But like, for example, with Art Rated, if people pitched us, sometimes it didn't make sense, the work that they were
yeah,
pitching. And in that case, if I didn't know them and it was out of left field and the work they were asking me to review just didn't make sense, and you have a lot of emails, sometimes you don't always get back to have a
for
chance to respond to
sure.
everybody. But if someone comes to you and it's like, hey, I checked out your website and I've read, these articles and I feel like maybe, my work kind of seems to,
Yeah,
it seems like something you might be interested in writing about based on, the other articles, like just to kind of show that they
yeah,
have reviewed the publication, that, they have bothered to look at some of the articles. It's not like you have to read every word, but just, take a look and see what kinds of work the people seem to be writing about. Because, if it's like um, I don't know, like a publication that's only doing like video and like 3D virtual reality,
totally.
exhibitions or something, then you're not going to pitch them with like a, classical realist show, or like vice versa. Or maybe someone's just focusing on figurative art. You probably, and some people are just open, they're writing about whatever they like. But
Yeah, but
at the
that's
least,
good. Like a good point. That's actually a really good point. I mean, it's
yeah.
always like useful. I mean, we should always do that with like approaching galleries or
Hmm.
curators or whatever. But actually, that's like a really good point. That's a good point for all applications that we make. I feel like to sort of. I think that's a good way to start. Like, based on what I've seen of either your writing or your if it's a gallery or a curator. I think that's good. Smart.
Yeah, just so that they know if you're asking someone to invest time in helping you. I mean, if you're just
Totally.
representing yourself and you don't have a gallery, and we don't know you personally, then yeah, just to be like, hey, I looked at your work, just to because sometimes you get messages where it just seems like someone's just spamming you and they're not actually, they don't really care. They just maybe might want
Totally.
like a publication. So then you're like, well, then like, why would I want to write about your work if you haven't, bothered to look at the website, and especially if it
Yeah.
doesn't make sense. So, but
Yeah.
you
It's
can
just like
usually
a
kind of
waste of your
tell.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
That like totally makes sense. And then like how is it like what are the deadlines usually like when you work for various publications?
I mean, it just depends for print, sometimes like 3 or 4 months out often, because and
Sweet.
then it could be even further if you're, needing to receive something in the mail, like a physical object. Although nowadays, I'm sure you could probably get something emailed as like, a PDF, or, have access to materials a little bit faster. But still, if
True.
it's something where, you have to, read a large amount of text and like do some like serious analysis, and like
Right.
then you might need more time. Whereas if it were, an artist interview for a blog, I mean, you have to factor in publication schedules. People, usually have an idea of what they want to write about, and then you have to fit it into their publication schedule. So, if you have a show coming up, just say you have like an exhibition that is going to open, I don't know, 6 months from now. Like, I think it wouldn't be too soon to start contacting people to let them know, like looking for
Right.
blogs or looking for publications. Because then I think it's always better to give people more time than they need. And I wouldn't underestimate, that people may already have a schedule of work that's already in line to be written about. Um,
For
so you just want to
sure.
get on their radar. So, the earlier you can do it, the better.
Yeah, for sure. And then like when you're writing, say for like the Brooklyn Rail or something, did you ever get like really tight deadlines where it's like I think I've read maybe another art writer, maybe it was even Jerry Saltz, or maybe I don't know who it was, someone talking about deadlines. And I think you might have mentioned it when we talked before too, like just about how much harder it can be like to if you have a tight deadline and just like I don't know, trying to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, I mean, if someone, I think that people, like for the most part, if they can try and avoid that, they will. Like they'll try to,
Oh,
plan stuff as
okay.
best they can, as best they can. But yeah, I mean, if someone needs you to go out and check something out in person, you might not get that much notice. They might contact you and be like, "Hey, can you go, see the show? And is it possible for you to get us something in the next, week or two? Because then that
Whoa.
would, but I think that that's unusual. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that usually you have a few weeks because if someone invites you, for example, if like if I knew I was going to have an art show or I wanted an artist to come write about work, I would try to, get them in the studio to see the stuff before it was even in the gallery, or I would invite them to the gallery ahead of time because you want something, you have to give people a few weeks, to edit and to publish, even for like a smaller
For
blog.
sure. Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
totally. Yeah, so I guess my last question would just be like about any adaptations that you see like in the art world and with art writing because of the pandemic.
Um, from what I've seen, it seems like there are more and more online exhibitions, and I'm, learning about different outlets that are doing like 3D virtual tours. And I think, in terms of adaptations, I think galleries and museums have had to learn pretty quickly how to set themselves up to be able to be more virtual. And in a way, that's kind of nice because it means that you can experience an exhibition even if you can't be there in person. I mean, most stuff is online anyway, but to be able to see, stuff into a 3D space gives you kind of an interesting perspective.
Mm,
So I feel like I've seen more online exhibition opportunities. Um,
for
you know,
sure.
and then there are companies like Microsoft that do like 3D kind of like virtual reality art. Um,
Ooh.
Experiences, and I just
Ooh.
there's so much happening kind of in that realm with more and more.
Yeah,
And I know Kristy, you and I have talked about NFTs and all of that. So I think
totally.
that like in terms of adaptation, of course, like we all hope that we can, be in person as much as possible, because to me there's nothing like sitting in front of a piece to see it in person, to be able to experience it fully. But that being said, I love the idea of being able to get access to people's work and experiences, from anywhere in the world. And so I think that I don't really know. I think that people are trying to adapt in that way, to make it
Yeah,
easily accessible. So,
that's totally
in a way,
true.
yeah, and in a way that makes it easier to review work if you can't be there in person.
That's true. Yeah. Um, Actually, I thought of one other question, so I guess that wasn't the last question. What advice would you have for someone who wants to get started with art writing? Like, how do you pitch? You kind of got into it. You sort of created your own, well, you were already doing it for the music industry, and then you kind of created your own opportunities, like with art rated and everything, and then it just started to take off. But what would it look like for someone to like pitch themselves as a possible writer to some publication like Brooklyn Rail? Like how does that work? What does that look like?
Um, I think it does help if you have prior writing experience. I think it
Yeah,
would be helpful for, a
for sure.
publication if you're going to try and go into print. I mean, they're probably going to want to see a writing portfolio. So, at the least, I would say, collect past pieces of writing. Maybe you've gone to school and done about, maybe you've studied art, maybe you've written a thesis, maybe you have written about art that you're interested in, like as an academic paper, or maybe you just have never gone to art school, and that's okay too, but you're just passionate about it. In which case, either way, I would say it's helpful. At the least, you should have, you know, a a zip file, or a PDF of the different pieces of artwork that you've written
Mm,
about.
mm,
I think like best case scenario is you've taken the time to build, a blog or a small website. It
mm.
doesn't have to be anything like super polished or, expensive to do, but just have a place where your writing is easy and able to be is easily viewable. And then you can just send that link to different publications, and they can, read what you've written in the past. Um,
Oh, would it be like would it be good if you had like your own blog that was just your writing, or if your writing was on different sites, could you send those links, or would that not be quite as good as having put together your own kind of blog that sort of had it all put together in one spot?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not an editor for a news publication. I've only ever really written. I mean, I've been an editor, but for online, I would say
Oh,
I
I
think
have.
individual links would be fine. But like if you're pitching yourself to be published like in print or something, I think that it would be important to collect um, all the different pieces of writing in one place, just to make it easy for
Mm,
someone to view.
that's cool. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what would the sort of like, I don't know, what would you say? Like, I know sort of generally if I was applying to a gallery, I would be like, oh, I wanted to introduce you to my work, enclose her some images, or, and then I'd be happy to show you more and maybe arrange a studio visit, something like that. What would you kind of say? Like, what would the email look like?
A lot of I would get started with like maybe some larger blogs. I mean, there's tons of like larger
Yeah.
blogs and online print publications, and they really need people. I mean, you're not
Hmm.
necessarily going to get paid, so
No.
you're volunteering your time in the beginning, but
Yeah.
maybe you need to do that just to have the experience. So I would say read their websites. Most of them may have a list of review or submission guidelines. Like I
Oh.
feel like a lot of
Uh-huh.
larger places do. But if they don't, you can always just contact them and say, hey, I'm interested in, submitting a review. And maybe you have something specific in mind and you just propose them on that. Hey, this is
Mm,
a great show. I feel really passionate about, and I think your platform's wonderful. I would love to be able to contribute. And how do you feel about this? Can you tell me more about your guidelines? What's
that's
your,
smart.
do you have any like editing specifications or people I need to work with? Like, what do I need to do? Um,
That's smart. That sounds really professional. Yeah, that's like really helpful. So, are there any ways that, like, being an art writer and writing about art so much, have you found that that's sort of influenced the way either your own studio practice, or just the way that you maybe write about your work?
um, Interestingly enough, I think it may have helped in some ways influence like my approach to painting, because I do kind of
Mm,
think in terms of writing. I'll kind of take some notes and I'll write out the ideas and the thoughts in the very beginning. So maybe in that way, it's kind of translated back into my studio practice.
that's cool. Yeah, I can see that. That's interesting. Well, this has been so interesting, Lily. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge about art writing. So, where can people find out more about you, about your art and your art writing?
Thanks for having me, Kristy. It's been so much fun. Really enjoying talking to you about art and art writing. You can find out more about me and my artwork and my art writing on my website, which is www.lilykoto.com. Also, I'm pretty responsive on Instagram, so if anyone wants to follow me or send me a message there, that handle is just at Lily Koto.
Excellent. Well, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Lily.
Thank you, Kristy.
Bye.
Bye.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Down to Art. And if you're interested in any of my classes or seeing my paintings, you can check out my work at kristygordon.com or look at the online classes I have at kristygordoncourses.com, where you can learn about my online art mentoring program, as well as the different streamed online classes that I have. If you've never taken any of my classes, I would suggest you start with the self-portrait class. So thank you for joining us today.